going on, everybody? Welcome back to Darren Paints Minis. My name is Darren, and today I'm going to paint up some Ossiarch Bonereapers skeletons as quick as possible without sacrificing quality. Before I ever start an army, I test the scheme on a few models and lock in colors, paint choices, and the overall workflow. For test models, I like to pick 2 or 3 models that are a good representation of the army overall. For mine, I chose basic troops, Mortec Guard, because they had bone, cloth, armor, and weapons, basically the same options as every other model in the army. Today, I'm going to paint up 6 of these Necropolis Stalkers, and I've painted quite a few Ossiarch Bonereapers so far, so my scheme has been refined and optimized over time. It starts with a brown primer, followed by 2 Zenithal sprays, a mid-tone bone, and then a lighter bone color. By locking in the scheme before I start painting the whole army, I'm not making decisions while I'm painting. You can, of course, still pivot if something works better or you find something not working as well, but you're not losing time picking paints piece by piece. And once you have your scheme planned, the next step is choosing the order of operations, what you paint first and why. Because this army is entirely skeletons, I prioritize the bone right at the start. These initial airbrush steps are going to do the majority of the work for the model, especially for our regular troops. This is also going to set me up perfectly for the rest of my scheme because I'm going to use mostly contrast style paints and build onto those, and a bright bone color gives the transparent paints the perfect base layer, with shadows already in place from all the Zenithal work that we did already. Everyone has a different definition for speed painting. For me, it's about getting a level of quality that I'm satisfied with in as quick a time as possible. And again, this is speaking for me personally, but I'm not going to be satisfied with just a bone primer and some contrast base coats, and that's it. But again, I don't have time to put hours and hours into each individual model because I got work and kids and all that stuff. So the approach that I'm discussing today is the happy middle ground that I've been able to find, where I'm at a level of quality that is personally satisfying for me, but also not taking hours and hours to do every single model. From here, it's pretty straightforward base coating with transparent contrast style paints, and here I'm using a mix of Citadel and Vallejo. The armor gets a teal, the accents get a gold yellow, the cloth is done with a dull green, and the weapon handles all get a bit of red. Because I'm speed painting for an army and not doing display or competition pieces, I don't want to spend an entirety highlighting every piece of the minis. The armor is going to get a scratchy highlight of light teal, while the accents get a spotty and selective highlight of ice yellow. The idea with these highlights is not to have perfect blends, just picking out edges and raised surfaces with brighter highlights to make them stand out and pop a bit, and give a bit of contrast between the base coat contrast that we put down and a little bit of the shading that we're going to do later. I've done an entire video showing how to paint old cloth on another set of Bonereapers models, but the idea here is that I'm going to sponge some highlights with pastel green, then a 50-50 mix of pastel green and bright ivory, then some selective spot highlights of pure ivory. To bring it all together, at the end I'm going to apply a glaze of the original contrast green, thin down 4 parts medium to paint. The work we've done so far looks great, but it could benefit from a little additional depth, and that's where the brown oil wash comes in, which is going to get applied all over the model. The oil wash is great for the bone, the armor, and the cloth, which is why we waited until after our highlights to apply it, going back to that order of operations I talked about earlier. You'll see here that I'm using a pre-made brown oil wash from scale 75. It's more a time-saving and consistency thing. I know what it's going to do and how it's going to behave every time I use it, but you could easily buy a tube of oil paint and some mineral spirits and mix up your own as well. The oil wash is going to bring all of our other work together, add that depth, and in addition, it's going to add a nice layer of grime and age to the whole model. Once the oil wash is dry, I go back in with a couple makeup sponges to remove some of the dried oil wash off the high points and the edges. This is going to give further separation between the highlights and the shadows, help promote that depth a little bit more. And one thing here too, I didn't put any mineral spirits on my makeup sponges. I didn't really need to in this case, but if your oil wash is dried for a little bit longer or not enough is coming off, you can certainly add a little bit of mineral spirits onto the sponge before you start removing the paint. And then for one more little bit on the bone, I'm going to sponge on some highlights of bright ivory. This isn't meant to be like an all-encompassing edge highlight or anything like that. This is just me spending a couple minutes going around the model with a sponge, doing a bit of this like bone chipping effect along the edges and raised surfaces. Final step to bring everything together is a reverse Zenithal spray. It's basically me thinning down Magnolia Brown from the Armored Painter Air range and spraying it from underneath the model to deepen the shadows. Like I said, this does require an airbrush, but it's an easy way to make a huge difference on the army from a visual standpoint, like when it's sitting on the tabletop. I wanted this army to have a bit of a pop of color, some focal points that really stood out on the table, and ultimately I settled on doing a bit of a glow effect for all the weapons and the eyes of the mini, because really everything else is a little bit drab. First, I needed to prep the surface with some white paint, and then I can apply Gauss green fluorescent paint from the Army Painter. I'm applying the white and the fluorescent on the weapons with the airbrush simply due to the time savings the airbrush brings, but you can, and I have for other models, just applied both with a regular brush. For the eyes, I'm just using a brush and doing several coats of the fluorescent to build up opacity. These models are small enough that trying to use the airbrush for the eyes just causes too much overspray and doesn't really look all that great. And it's gonna ultimately mean losing time because I have to spend more time cleaning it up. onto the home stretch now, and before I start on the bases, I do apply a coat of matte varnish to everything to kind of harmonize all the finishes that we got from the contrast and the oil washes. But yeah, the next step is the bases. You can either make these as easy or as complex as you want, but I've gone a bit simpler with my basing for this army. I'm going to apply a layer of muddy ground texture paste from AK Interactive over the whole of the bases. And I'm not super worried about being neat here, and if some of it gets on the feet of the models, then that's great, because it's just going to help sell the fact that these minis are actually in this environment. Once the texture paste is fully dry, I'm going to apply a couple of these 6mm dry tufts by Gamer's Grass, and I am using a little bit of super glue to help stick them down. When that's done, the last step for the basing is to apply some Desert Dust pigment powder from Vallejo. I apply a little bit of it with a soft makeup brush and then smash it all around the base and the legs of the models, really working it in, and then blowing off any excess powder. I don't apply any pigment fixer or anything like that. I like the dry look that the pigments give, and I'm really not touching the bases enough to have the powder rub off or anything like that. The final overall step here is to just paint the base rims black, and then we are left with this. In total, these 6 minis took just over 3.5 hours. That works out to be about 36 minutes per model, and for that time invested, I'm super happy with this level of quality that we were able to achieve. I hope you liked this video, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.